The moment the small being with almost human features first lifted its large, dark eyes to Jedediah, a lifetime of abandonment and loneliness found its deepest meaning. It was as if every tear shed in the silence of the cabin had been a prayer answered by the universe. But to understand the magnitude of that moment, we must go back 3 days, when the high moon cast silvery streaks across the gravel of the forgotten road. Jedediah walked slowly along the dusty trail, dragging his feet like someone who no longer expects to find anything but their own echo. He had lived like this for years, a specter present in the world, but invisible to the hurried eyes of the rare travelers who crossed that abandoned path. The faint bleating that broke the silence that night could have been ignored by anyone else. But Jedediah, accustomed to the subtle language of the forsaken, immediately recognized the sound of despair. He approached slowly, like someone approaching a mystery, and found the sheep kneeling on the dirt. The sight deeply disturbed him. The animal was blindfolded, as if merciless hands had decided to deprive it of the world's light. Its dirty, matted wool told tales of mistreatment, and its mysteriously swollen belly stirred in Jedediah an unease he couldn't name. "What have they done to you, creature?" he murmured, more to himself than to the animal. His words were lost in the night wind, but something in the sheep's posture changed, as if it recognized in the man's voice a long-awaited familiarity. Moved by an instinct he thought he had lost forever, Jedediah untied his worn shawl. His trembling hands worked with infinite care to remove the cloth covering the animal's eyes. When he finally succeeded, the sheep looked up, and Jedediah saw something that made him take a step back. In its brown orbs shone a contained fire, as if an ancestral soul inhabited them, carrying secrets from ages past. "You're not ordinary," he whispered, extending a hesitant hand. The animal's strong heartbeat was almost human in its distress, and Jedediah felt a connection that transcended any rational explanation. "Come with me, I won't leave you alone." The decision to take the sheep to his makeshift cabin stemmed from an impulse he didn't question. For years he had learned to distrust his own feelings, but at that moment, something greater than reason guided him. He gathered fresh hay, brought clean water, and kept a small fire burning, spreading warmth and golden light across the worn planks of the structure. In the nights that followed, a silent routine was established between them. Jedediah woke several times to check on the sheep, and it watched him with those deep eyes that seemed to thank him not only for the care, but for the restored dignity. It was as if two beings abandoned by the world had found, in each other, proof that they were still capable of mattering to someone. "You know," Jedediah would say, talking to her like he was speaking to a wounded child, "I've been blindfolded too, not with cloth, but with the blindness of someone who believes they don't deserve to be loved." The sheep would tilt its head, and he had the strange certainty that his words were understood on some deep primitive level. During the second day, the animal's restlessness increased. Jedediah noticed how it constantly sought a more secluded corner of the cabin, as if it sensed that something important was about to happen. He himself felt a growing expectation, a tension in the air that resembled the quiet that precedes great storms. "Are you afraid?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "I am too. It's been so long since anything extraordinary has happened in my life that I've forgotten what it's like to wait for a miracle." It was on the third dawn that the mystery finally revealed itself. The sheep, agitated, sought the quietest corner of the cabin. Jedediah followed, driven by an intuition he couldn't explain, and gently placed his hand on the curve of its swollen belly. What he felt made him tremble. There, low and sudden like an internal thunder, echoed a strangely human babble. Jedediah recoiled, his heart pounding, his wrinkles contracting in a mixture of astonishment and reverence. "This can't be real," he murmured. But his words sounded weak in the face of the evidence his own senses presented to him. The sheep let out a long sigh, as if in the expulsion of air it revealed the weight of a secret kept for ages, and then began the process that would forever change the life of that man forgotten by the world. And then was born not an ordinary lamb, but a being of surprising features, a young one with almost human features, large dark eyes that seemed to carry the wisdom of ancient civilizations, covered in fine white fur that shimmered as if reflecting its own mysterious light. The little one rose on delicate legs, attempted its first wobbly steps, and its first gaze fell upon Jedediah, as if recognizing in him not only a savior but a guardian, destined to protect something precious. Jedediah's veins throbbed as he contemplated that extraordinary being. Every movement of the newborn seemed an ancestral dance. Every sound it emitted sounded like a song crossing generations. The old man, who had for so long learned to bury his emotions under layers of resignation and bitterness, felt tears well up uncontrollably. They were not tears of sadness, but of a deep and transformative relief. He had discovered that his life, despite all the emptiness, still held space for the impossible. "You came to teach me something, didn't you?" he whispered, extending his trembling fingers toward the small being. "Perhaps the most important lesson I've ever needed to learn." In the days that followed, the news spread through the countryside like wildfire. A solitary man had taken in a blindfolded ewe and witnessed the birth of a creature that defied all known laws of nature. Curious onlookers, skeptics and believers alike, began to make the pilgrimage to the isolated cabin, bringing with them everything from humble offerings and profound doubts to fervent prayers, and in some cases, aggressive skepticism aimed at exposing what they considered an elaborate hoax. But upon arriving, all encountered the same scene: Jedediah, now transformed into a vigilant guardian, the ewe mother resting silently with an impressive dignity that awed even the most disbelieving, and the extraordinary lamb, which looked at each visitor as if probing the purity of their hearts with a wisdom that transcended its tender age. "It's impossible," declared Mrs. Mercy, the wealthiest merchant in the region, arriving at the cabin in her ornate carriage. "This is a trick, some kind of act to fool the simpletons and extort money from the naive." Jedediah greeted her with the patience he had learned during years of solitude. "Mrs. Mercy, you are welcome to see with your own eyes. We don't charge anything. We don't ask for anything. We simply welcome those who come with an open heart." "Open heart," she laughed, but her laughter sounded forced. "Man, I built a commercial empire because I learned not to be fooled by fanciful stories. This animal is nothing but a common lamb that you're using to impress the gullible." It was then that the lamb approached her with delicate steps. Mrs. Mercy prepared to push it away with disdain, but when she looked directly into the creature's deep eyes, something shifted in her expression. For a moment, her defenses crumbled, and she saw reflected in that gaze not judgment or condemnation, but an infinite compassion that reminded her of the girl she once was, before the harshness of the world transformed her into the ruthless woman she had become. She stammered, taking a step back. "I need to leave." But that night, Mrs. Mercy returned, alone this time without the ostentatious carriage, walking the dusty trail like any ordinary. She found Jedediah sitting at the cabin's door, contemplating the stars with a serenity she envied. "I'm back," she said simply. "I knew you would return." Jedediah replied without surprise. "Everyone returns, because we all carry blindfolds on our hearts, and when we find someone who can remove them, we can't resist the possibility of seeing clearly." She sat beside him, and for the first time in decades, Mrs. Mercy allowed herself to be vulnerable. "I built all of this," she gestured vaguely in the direction of her distant properties, "because I thought accumulating things would make me feel less empty. But that look, those eyes showed me that I'd become a prisoner of my own armor." For those who follow these stories of extraordinary encounters that transform ordinary lives, remember that subscribing to the channel ensures you continue receiving accounts like this, which show us how the extraordinary can emerge from the simplest moments of our existence. During the following weeks, the transformation in the region was remarkable. Dr. Augustus, a respected but embittered physician, burdened by the loss of patients he had failed to save, arrived at the cabin, carrying the weight of all the lives that had slipped through his fingers. He expected to find charlatanism, but discovered something quite different. "Doctor," Jedediah said when he introduced himself. You carry on your back a burden that is not yours to bear. The responsibility of saving everyone is God's, not yours. How can you say that, Doctor? Augustus exploded. I swore to protect lives. Every person I lost is a failure of mine. The lamb approached the doctor and gently rested its head in his hand. In that simple touch, Dr. Augustus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: forgiveness. Not the forgiveness of others, but the forgiveness of himself. I saved many lives too, he murmured, tears flowing freely. Why do I only remember the ones I lost? Because Jedediah replied kindly. It's easier to carry guilt than to accept that we did our best. Guilt gives us the illusion of control, but forgiveness gives us peace. Father Joachim arrived in the 5th week, bringing with him the rigidity of decades spent preaching about a God he secretly feared he had never truly understood. He came to expose what he considered a heresy, but found something that shook the foundations of his calcified faith. This is blasphemy, he declared upon seeing the lamb. You are suggesting that this animal is some kind of divine messenger? Father Jedediah said calmly. We suggest nothing. We simply welcome what has come to us and learn from what is taught to us. Don't you teach that God can speak through any creature? The priest fell silent, confronted by his own doctrine which he preached but rarely practiced with an open heart. When the lamb approached him fearlessly, despite his initial hostility, Father Joachim understood something fundamental. True spirituality does not reside in rigid dogmas, but in the ability to recognize the sacred wherever it manifests itself. I spent my whole life, he confessed later, trying to put God in a box that I could understand. But perhaps he is too big for any box. Professor Benedict, a renowned intellectual who arrived armed with scientific explanations to discredit the phenomenon, found himself facing something that defied not only his theories, but his compulsive need to categorize and explain everything. He observed the lamb for hours, taking meticulous notes, searching for tricks or rational explanations. It doesn't make sense, he murmured, frustrated. The physical characteristics, the behavior, the apparent intelligence, none of it fits into any known classification. Professor Jedediah intervened softly. Some things don't need to make sense to the mind to make sense to the heart. Have you considered that there may be mysteries that are not meant to be solved but lived? The question shook the professor to his core. His entire life had been dedicated to unraveling secrets, transforming mysteries into understandable formulas. The idea that something could be simultaneously real and inexplicable forced him to question not only his methodologies, but his own relationship with the unknown. Perhaps, he finally admitted, I've confused knowledge with wisdom. I may know many things, but perhaps I truly know nothing about the mysteries that truly matter. As the weeks passed, Jedediah's cabin became an unofficial pilgrimage site. People came from distant villages, drawn not only by curiosity about the extraordinary lamb, but by the old man's growing reputation as someone possessing a special wisdom to heal invisible wounds. It was as if the presence of the ewe and her lamb had awakened in Jedediah a latent ability to see through the masks people wore to hide their deepest pains. He offered no magic solutions or grand pronouncements, but rather an attentive presence and simple words that seemed to touch exactly where each visitor most needed to be touched. Jedediah, Mrs. Mercy asked one afternoon, having become a regular visitor, how do you always know what to say? How do you see through our lies? The old man smiled, gently stroking the ewe resting beside him. Mrs. Mercy, when a person has spent their whole life being invisible, they learn to truly see others. When you've been ignored by the entire world, you develop a special sensitivity to recognize those who are suffering in silence. But that doesn't explain everything, she insisted. There's something different about you since you found this ewe. As if she awakened something that was dormant. Jedediah nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps that's true. Perhaps I've learned that when we embrace a defenseless being with true love, we discover capacities within ourselves that we didn't even know existed. This ewe didn't give me special powers, Mrs. Mercy. She gave me back my humanity. Winter arrived mild that year, bringing with it the season of great transformations. The lamb had grown, retaining its extraordinary characteristics, but developing an even more striking presence. Its intelligence was unquestionable, its ability to connect emotionally with people, remarkable, but more important than its unique characteristics was the effect it continued to have on the people who encountered it. It was during this time that the most significant challenge Jedediah and his protégés would face arrived. Colonel Vance, a powerful and influential man from the capital, had heard rumors about the farce of the crazy old man and his circus animal, and decided it was time to put an end to what he considered a disgrace to the region. He arrived accompanied by local authorities and several important figures, with the clear intention of publicly exposing what he saw as an elaborate charade designed to deceive the simple and superstitious. "Where is the famous miraculous animal?" he thundered, descending from his official carriage. "I'm here to end this nonsense once and for all." Jedediah received the group with the same serenity with which he received all visitors. "Colonel Vance, you're welcome. Come and meet our friends." "Friends," the colonel laughed scornfully. "Man, you're deluding simple people with cheap tricks. This is unacceptable." At that moment, the mother ewe emerged from the cabin, followed by her extraordinary lamb. The colonel prepared to immediately dismiss what he saw as an ordinary lamb, but when the small creature looked him directly in the eye, something unexpected happened. In the creature's deep eyes, the colonel saw reflected a version of himself he had buried decades ago. The poor boy who dreamed of making a difference in the world, before power and influence transformed him into the hard and insensitive man he had become. For a terrifying and revealing moment, he saw himself as he truly was, not a respected leader, but a man who had lost his own soul in the pursuit of control and recognition. This isn't," he stammered, instinctively recoiling. "Disturbing, isn't it?" Jedediah said gently. "When we encounter something that shows us who we really are inside, our first reaction is always to flee or attack." The colonel tried to regain his authoritative composure. "I won't be fooled by psychological tricks. I demand that this circus be shut down immediately." But his voice trembled, and everyone present could perceive that something fundamental had changed in his demeanor. The lamb approached him slowly, unafraid of the hostility radiating from him, and gently touched his hand with its nose. In that simple touch, the colonel felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: genuine vulnerability. Not the weakness he had always feared showing, but the courageous vulnerability of someone who allows themselves to be touched by real life, not the edited version we construct to impress others. He began, but the words refused to come. Tears came first, silent and transformative, followed by an understanding that would forever change his perspective on power, leadership, and what it truly means to be strong. "Colonel," Jedediah said softly, "true power never comes from our ability to control others, but from our courage to allow ourselves to be transformed by the encounters life offers us." That afternoon, something extraordinary happened. The man who had come to shut down a farce became the most unlikely defender of that small sanctuary of transformation. Colonel Vance used his influence not to silence Jedediah, but to protect people's right to seek in the humble cabin what they couldn't find in grand palaces and churches. "There are things in this world," he declared publicly, "that cannot be measured, weighed, or explained, but they can be experienced, and sometimes that's what we need most. Not explanations, but experiences that remind us of what it means to be truly human." Over the months, the transformation in the region became impossible to ignore. Mrs. Mercy began using her wealth to help needy families, discovering that true abundance came not from what she accumulated, but from what she shared. Dr. Augustus developed a more compassionate approach with his patients, understanding that healing went far beyond treating physical symptoms. Father Joachim began preaching about a God of unconditional love instead of an implacable judge, and his homilies became celebrations of grace instead of catalogues of sins. Professor Benedict integrated into his scientific methodology an openness to mysteries that didn't need to be solved to be respected. But the most remarkable transformation was Jedediah's. The man who had been invisible to the world for so long became a beacon for lost souls, not because he had acquired special powers, but because he had rediscovered his own capacity to love unconditionally and to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. You know what I've learned, he said one evening to a group of regular visitors who gathered to discuss life's mysteries. I've learned that we aren't saved by the miracles we witness, but by our willingness to become miraculous for others. This ewe and her lamb didn't come to solve our problems, but to show us that we all carry within ourselves the capacity to transform pain into compassion, abandonment into acceptance. The ewe, now completely free of the blindfold that once covered her eyes, had developed a habit of wandering the region's roads, always accompanied by her single lamb. They became living symbols of hope for weary travelers and wounded souls, reminding everyone they encountered that it's never too late to remove the blindfolds we place on our own hearts. The lamb, growing with steady steps and an increasingly wise gaze, became the link between past and future, carrying the message that the extraordinary is always a compassionate gesture away from being revealed. Its constant presence in the community's life served as a daily reminder that miracles aren't singular events that happen to a privileged few, but constant transformations available to anyone willing to embrace them with an open heart. No one looked at those roads with the same eyes as before. Each curve brought the expectation of a new transformative encounter. Each passing traveler felt invited to shed their own inner blindfolds, to discover within themselves that spark capable of generating life in the most arid deserts of the soul. Years passed, and the story of the abandoned old man who took in a blindfolded ewe became legend in the region. But for those who lived the experience firsthand, it wasn't legend or myth, it was living proof that even in the most improbable circumstances, love has the power to transform abandonment into purpose, loneliness into connection, and the ordinary into the extraordinary. Jedediah aged surrounded not by the loneliness that had marked most of his life, but by the constant company of people who had learned to see through their own transformed eyes. The cabin that once sheltered only a man forgotten by the world became a home where wounded hearts found healing, where lost souls discovered direction, and where the impossible became commonplace through the simple practice of unconditional love. And so the abandoned old man gave that blindfolded ewe not only physical shelter, but a place in the heart of a world thirsty for genuine tenderness. What she carried in her womb, the embryo of a new dawn of human compassion, taught everyone that even on the most barren and seemingly hopeless roads, those who embrace true and renewing love can always expect the unexpected, the daily miracle of rebirth in every being who crosses our path, carrying invisible blindfolds, waiting for someone courageous enough to gently remove them and transform wounds into wisdom, abandonment into acceptance, and despair into renewed hope.